A very warm welcome to you on Business Morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. It was a sad day for residents of Lagos Island and Nigeria indeed, as 10 persons, including 4 pupils, were feared dead on Wednesday following the collapse of a building. Well, this is a wake-up call for actions by not just the government, but those responsible for housing development to ensure safety of life and property. And for those that lost their lives in that unfortunate incident, may their souls rest in peace. Well, let's move into the market now for a review of midweek trading at the Nigerian equities market. Let's bring in Temple Ashaju. Hello, Temple. Good morning. Well, the market halted its 5-day bearish run yesterday. The benchmark index went up by 0.15%. Did you expect that performance?
Well, we, in a kind of way, a lot of traders, a lot of investors did expect it because, again, it looks like those losses on those companies that experienced basically bore the brunt of those losses in the market have actually bottomed out. So it was an opportunity for re-entry yesterday. I recall that we had this conversation a little bit at noon yesterday during the launch program, Business Incorporated, and that was why we saw a whole lot of renewed interest in the banking segment and, of course, the consumer goods segment of the market. Even though we know that the consumer goods segment of the market, it was only the interest in Nestle PLC that eventually drove up the performance. But basically, we saw a bit of moderation in terms of the month-to-date losses, which was around 1.13%, and of course the year-to-date losses, which moderated around 0.22% as opposed to 0.32% in the preceding session. But if you look at the equity capitalization of the almost 200 billion naira worth of losses that we saw on the equity capitalization at the preceding session, where the market was able to regain some 17.5 billion naira yesterday to settle at 11.694 trillion naira. Activity level was a bit mixed, in some kind of a zigzag movement there. The volume was positive. We saw 72% units of shares traded in the market. But when you look at the value of the transaction yesterday, it declined by some 23% to settle at 2.261 billion naira. And of course, as you said earlier, the 5 days of losses was really bucked yesterday. We saw Diamond Bank, which has been experiencing some kind of decline, rising yesterday some 2.89%, did some 130 million units of its shares for a value of 283 million naira. And if we go by the sectoral analysis, you see banking segment of the market, a whole lot of the companies, banking names that actually lost on Tuesday regained all of those losses on Wednesday. Guarantee Trust Bank rose some 0.56%. Sterling Bank did 9% plus. Diamond Bank and FBN Holdings, ahead of their earnings that may be released, also experienced some gains. But if you look at the consumer segment of the market, we saw more of profits taken across the counters. Dangote Flour, Dangote Sugar, Guinness PLC were all in losses. But we saw the bellwether food giants, talking about Nestle, rising all of a sudden by some 4.72%. Of course, it has an attractive dividend being paid, which will be paid to investors going forward. That was how the segments, that consumer goods segment of the market, was able to rise some 1.60%. Insurance segment of the market saw some losses, some gains rather, on Lasako Insurance by more than 6%, but the losses that we saw on Prestige Assurance by some 7%, and of course regular insurance were one of the key things that outweighed the performance of Lasako PLC, and of course that pulled back the segment into losses. The industrial goods segment of the market, we saw a bit of sell pressure on Dangote segment, down some 1.03%, and was able to impact the sectors negatively. But this takes us to energy segment of the market to talk about the oil and gas segment. If you look at the numbers across board, there was no change in the share price movement. Of course, Etana PLC was the only company that had some 9.09% gain, but that was unable to change the mood or to change the reading on the oil and gas segment of the market. It was flat basically yesterday after some 195,862 units of the shares was traded yesterday. That represents a bit of some retail trading there. But for the unlisted securities market, it was negative 0.74%. We got it closing at 719.09, valued at with a market capitalization of 516 billion naira. If you look at the volume of transaction, about 100% decline in terms of the volume of transaction, and just 92.11% decline in terms of the value of the transaction that we saw there yesterday. For the deals was just 16. That's a bit of 300% higher than what we had in the preceding session, and activities was more on just 5 of the securities tradable on that platform. For the fixed income segment of the market, starting with the bond segment, it was a bit bullish outing yesterday, midweek. We saw the likes of June 2019, January 2026, as well as April 2037 security recording some real expansion yesterday. That's because across board, across the short, the mid, and the long ends of the curve, there was a bullish sentiment there. We saw so much of buy side on all of this, and therefore average yield compressed by some 9 basis points to 14% plus yesterday.
Okay, Temple, we just have
segment
to...
of the market.
Temple, it's very early into today's trading though, but what sentiment have you observed so far?
Thanks for joining us again right here at the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The market is right now between the bears and the bulls at this point. At a point in time, we saw the gains in the market up some 0.06%. At some point again, the market went flat. Tells you that we're seeing some buy side and we're seeing some sell side in the markets. Of course, the banking names are still the counters basically to watch. You got the likes of Sterling Bank doing the topmost in terms of trades, some 17 million units of its shares traded, of the entire 18 million units of in terms of volume that has been traded, total volume of the market transactions seen today. Sterling Bank constituted more than 90% of that in early trades. We also saw UBA as well as FBN Holdings. In terms of FBN Holdings, close to 500,000 units of FBN Holdings shares was traded way faster earlier. But of course, you know how it is. The market continues to crunch. So it's basically that the fact that the market right now, its indices is between the bears and the bulls. We don't know who's going to win at the end of the day. However, the banking names are still the key counters to watch. UBA too was also found on the top trade segment, and of course the gainers chart raking in some gain in the market. Was earlier up, UBA up some 0.66%, FBN Holdings up some 1.2%, and of course in early trades, sustaining the kind of sentiments that it's began with midweek yesterday. Sterling Bank was doing some 5.93%, and of course this signals the fact that the earnings of these companies has been much expected, much awaited by a lot of traders, a lot of investors in the market. It was really ripe for release in the market. Hopefully today, one of these earnings will come into the market and will be able to shape the trading day much better.
Would you say that the earnings out so far are beginning to change the narrative for investors, particularly as the elections are over now?
Yes, in a way, it's really changing it. The concern, however, is the fact that it offers some kind of opportunity for exit for foreign investors. If you look at the investors and exporters windows yesterday in terms of the FX side of the market, now you see that some the demand side yesterday kind of reduced by over 50%. It tells you that the exit of the foreign portfolio investors from the bonds market and of course the equities market, and in fact some of a portion of the T-bills market is beginning to wane. Before now it was really on the high side. So that explains the kind of sentiment we're seeing in the market. We have a bit of the domestic investors still coming in, domestic retail investors, institutional investors, corporates as well, all coming in at this point, to take whatever could be of the dividends in terms of what it could be like by way of a profit to them eventually. So, but that also offers exit for FPIs. And that's the kind of narrative we're seeing in the market, which has been changed due to the dividend payment by a lot of the companies that has good fundamentals here on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Chimeze.
All right, Tebo, hang in there. You'll give us more updates later in the day on our lunchtime show, Business Incorporated. Thank you. And on that note, we draw the curtain on today's edition of the program. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Chimezie Obi Iwagu.